every time you open an Apple computer and you hear, the Apple startup sound, you can just say Apple startup sound to anybody and they know exactly what you mean. And that sound has been around for so long. It's had some changes here and there in terms of pitching up or down in the length and things like that. But the association to the sound and the brand is so strong. Is like incredibly strong. Probably one of the strongest brand product sounds that exists.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Notes of Design. Notes of Design is a podcast that dives into the fascinating design world by hosting conversations with leaders from across the globe. Each episode unpacks the unique journey of designers, artists, and researchers, offering insights into their creative process and perspective. Today we are diving into the fascinating world of audio branding, a powerful dimension of design that shapes how we hear and feel the brands. Joining me is Dexter, an audio branding strategist, UX sound designer, music producer, and co-founder of Audio UX, a New York-based sonic branding agency. Dexter and his team have been at the forefront of crafting holistic sonic identity systems for some of the world's most innovative brands, from international banks and electric vehicles to AI voice assistants and smart home appliances. In this conversation, Dexter takes us behind the scenes of how sound becomes a core part of the design. We explore the psychology of audio, the craft of building consistent sonic identities, and how brands can harness the emotional power of sound to connect with people on a deeper level. So plug in your headphones and tune in. This episode will sound different in the best way possible.
Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to quickly share some exciting news. My new book, Notes of Wisdom Lessons from 100 Creative Visionaries, is officially out. This book is a accumulation of insights and experiences gathered from interviewing some of the most inspiring minds in various creative fields. I'm thrilled to share their wisdom with you all. You can find the links to purchase the book on Amazon in the episode description. Be sure to check it out and let me know what you think. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Notes of Design. In this episode, we have a very special guest with us. Hi Dexter, welcome to Notes of Design.
Hi Tej, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
So, how was your day so far?
Starts the same as every morning. I get woken up at about 7 o'clock, bright and early, from my 10-pound Chihuahua that's just ripping and ready to go for the day. I got little dog licks all over my face, and then we're off to the races, feeding her, walking her, and then just booked it right to the studio to chat with you. If you're a dog owner, you know what I mean. It's one of the greatest ways to get woken up in the morning, kind of like a nice funny personal alarm clock. But yeah, I'm excited to be here, Tej.
Thank you so much, Dexter. So if you could give a brief about yourself to our listeners out there.
Yeah, my name is Dexter Garcia, and I'm a co-founder of a company called Audio UX, which is an audio branding agency based in New York City. Our studio is based in kind of right in the middle of Manhattan on 14th and 6th, but I reside in Brooklyn, one of the cooler boroughs, you might say. Yeah.
Thank you, Dexter. So what was your journey into audio design and how did you start, and what advice would you give to someone looking to start a career in audio branding?
Yeah, so the way I kind of got involved with this whole thing was just by being a musician by trade and being a music lover from the beginning, just kind of getting introduced to music at a young age and then following and practicing instruments, throughout school and everything. But I'd say it like really officially started when I made the decision to go to Berklee College of Music in Boston. Berklee, if you don't know, is a music conservatory and music industry and entertainment and technology school in Boston, Massachusetts. And I feel like that was where I got to really understand and explore the kind of outer limits of where I could take my musicianship. I got introduced to a lot of things there, music business, which I was really interested in, got to kind of accelerate my understanding and practice in music engineering and sound production and acoustics and psychoacoustics. It was a great way to kind of dip my toe into kind of all aspects of applying your sensibilities to sound. But from there, like everybody that goes to Berklee, you have big dreams of being a rock star, and that's sort of what I pursued first. Is I recorded an album and had the amazing opportunity to tour that album. It got picked up, did a little bit of touring in the U.S., Canada, a little bit of UK and London, and a little bit of Europe. So I kind of started as a recording artist, and being in a band, and I sang and I played bass and I wrote songs along with my kind of fellow bandmates, and it was a really good experience. It really, being in a band teaches you, it's like a crash course in all these kind of micro aspects of business and marketing, actually. And because you're creating a product, and then you're kind of marketing that product and promoting that product through touring, and then you have to think about album artwork. So now you're thinking about, oh well, how does the visual aesthetic or our visual brand match up with the this audio content that we've created, or this this art that we've created. And that was kind of my first dose of trying to put together a holistic experience for an audience. And I really loved doing that. I really loved thinking about my career as a recording artist as this like holistic experience. And so those concepts of holism and brand and marketing, like once I got kind of involved in a little bit of that world later on in my career, the concepts really made sense, and I was able to apply my experience, what little experience I had from being in a music group, to the practice I have today. So, but while I was touring, and while I was playing music and recording it in studios and working with the labels and agents and all that stuff, it's not enough money to to support yourself, as the story goes. So in the background, I was using my musicianship, and I was using my composition abilities and songwriting for commercial music, and like many bands do, kind of nightlight or moonlight, sorry, as a commercial writer. And so we were writing music for different brands like Tiffany's, and different short films. And I loved that part of writing, and I liked strategically applying. Whereas, in the band, you're really just writing from the heart a lot of the time, kind of putting down on paper whatever comes to mind or whatever you're feeling that day. But in writing for, like a creative director and an agency, and for a brand and for a commercial purpose, I liked that there was a strategic framework to apply my musicianship. And so I kind of grew fond of that process. And so naturally for me, after the band stopped playing and I didn't want to do the touring thing anymore, I naturally found myself, writing music consistently for brands and advertising agencies. And so through that process, then that you start to expand into, and I got hired at an audio branding agency. And then from there, found some other creatives. We were all working together. And then one day we decided, we say, hey, I think that we can really take this audio branding practice to the next level. Kind of transitioning out of commercial music and into audio branding, I really liked there was even more of a strategic emphasis on the longevity and the scale at which you could create musical assets for a brand. I thought that was really interesting. And I liked that there was sort of this immortality to what you would create, and it would live for a long time with the brand. And so there was also lots of importance with that. And I liked that it was a really high stakes, if you might say, in terms of what I was putting down into a short form song or something like that. So I think that just, it really resonated with me. And then it felt really strongly enough to kind of band together with some other really amazing creative people, and then start our own agency called Audio UX. And then, so I guess that's where, sorry, you can cut out that pause, but I guess it's kind of, that's sort of where audio UX and what I'm doing today, that's sort of how that was born. I think for some advice, if you're looking to get into audio branding, there's many different angles at which you can get involved in audio branding, whether it's through, the film scoring route, or through game sound design, or through songwriting. Audio branding can be applied to kind of a brand strategy in a myriad of different ways, whether it's an audio logo, whether it's a brand theme, whether it's product sounds for a device, whether it's consistent commercial music and advertising. There's many different ways. So I wouldn't worry too much about do I have the right background qualifications and all that. I think that if you have a great sensibility to sound, and you have a good kind of mind of business and marketing, I think skills can be learned along the way. it is important ultimately to be really effective as a creative, to really be a really versatile composer and to be a really versatile creative. And I think being a good listener is almost as important as being a good writer. You really have to be. I think it's important to kind of sharpen your skills in order to be successful in this career, to be a good listener to your clients and to really hear what people are trying to say, because you're the expert in the room, right? Like, you have the language, you have the knowledge, you have the education in this category. And I think what really makes ultimately a great kind of creative partner to brands is the ability to listen and the ability to pick up on your client's intuition, the ability to pick up on the nuances and what they're feeling and what direction they want to go in. And I think that ultimately is one of the biggest skills you can have when getting into audio branding. You will always continue to develop your compositional skills, your engineering skills, but the number one goal is to help translate what your partner brand is looking to do in terms of sound. So you need to really be a good listener and a good translator. So I think in terms of advice, in terms of starting the career, I would say as long as you hold that piece really, really dear to your heart, then, the practical and hard and soft skills, those will come along the way. I mean, you do have to functionally be, an educated and proficient composer and everything. But just knowing that, uh, always being a learner, always discovering kind of new ways to practice your sound design technique, to practice your musicianship, to practice your musicality, because being maybe a commercial music composer by trade or a film scoring composer by trade, you're in a very consistent arena. You're applying your compositional skills in very similar environments. But when you make the transition to audio branding, you really have to hop between, sound design for a product. Okay, now I'm doing an audio logo for TikTok. Now I'm doing maybe like a music library for a particular brand that's trying to scale out how they use their musical assets. Now I'm thinking about doing sound design for an automotive experience. There's many audio branding agencies get called upon to use their sonic consulting and creative skills in a really wide range of applications. So it's important to always be a learner of new platforms and new techniques, and always to have your ear to the ground of what's happening and what's happening with brands. So yeah, just being a good listener and always being open to new concepts, and always being just a constant learner of new technologies and new concepts, I would say.
Thank you so much, Dexter, for sharing those wonderful recommendations with us. So let's get into our episode today, audio branding. So how do you define audio branding for our listeners who may be new to this concept, and why is it essential for businesses today?
Yeah, I would say audio branding, and I really like starting with this definition of audio branding, but I think audio branding is really can be defined as any intentional use of sound or music in association with a brand. It's really, I think if we start with audio branding as a really broad definition, it's really helpful to kind of open the doors of understanding to audio branding, and it really helps kind of de-alienate audio branding, or kind of demystify audio branding, and kind of create more access to more brands that are looking to get into audio branding. Like, for instance, I mean, with that said, most people understand audio branding from the perspective of the audio logo. The audio logo is kind of one of the more popular. The audio logo is undoubtedly, the strongest association that people have to audio branding. But while that's all well and good, and that is the truth in many ways, I think it's helpful to think about audio branding as being any intentional use of music and sound if the goal is to associate your brand with the sound. And that can be any sound. I even consider, a really good example of this is like, there's a coffee shop kind of near my place, and every morning I go to this coffee shop, not because the coffee is really good, or there's not even a lot of seating at this coffee shop, right? But every time I'm in there, the barista is playing really good music, so good that I have to, like, if I'm standing in line getting a coffee, every time I'm getting coffee in the morning, I have to whip out my phone and I have to Shazam, like, what is playing right now? This just fits the day and the time so well. It just fits whatever season this is. I find this particular barista has a really good sense of music and is able just to, put something on that makes everybody feel either at ease or just excited for the day. And I like using this example because in order for me to get to this coffee shop, I have to pass two other coffee shops to get to this coffee shop. Those other two coffee shops arguably have much better coffee than this coffee shop that I go to, but it's the musical experience that really draws me to go back and to spend my money there, and for me to talk about, like I'm talking about right now, about this experience that I'm having. And maybe that's kind of an amplified scenario because I'm obviously a music lover, but I think that's really can be translated to a lot of different people that show up there. But I think even that kind of a primitive example of intentionally using music just even to create a good brand experience, like that's the most basic and probably most primitive form of audio branding. And I think it's really good to think about audio branding as that starting place. Now, with that being said, most brands do come to the audio branding marketplace looking for an audio logo because the audio logo is, arguably one of the most effective assets and tools that a brand can use when it comes to audio branding, for sure. And so I think that's really helpful to think in that definition. I think it's really helpful for brands to think about it that way, to approach the business challenges that they have today when it comes to using audio and music and sound in an effective way, because the landscape has really changed over the past decade or so. Audio branding really started as, the jingle writing practice. And, and I think a lot of the fundamentals of jingle writing are still really relevant today. There's still like an artistry and a musicianship, and there's still all of those aspects at play here. Like the underlying creative and artistic talent is still applied today. But there's a heavier emphasis now on kind of strategic thinking and design and strategy. And I think that's largely due because the platforms have really changed over the past little while. We have an explosion of social media and social media platforms. There's obviously explosion in podcasting and podcast ads. There's explosion in digital media, the digital audio streaming, Spotify, Tidal, iHeartRadio, Pandora. The number of audio first or audio enabled platforms and the rate of audio consumption has totally exploded over the last little while. So brands need to figure out, okay, well, how do we, now that there are more channels for us to express ourselves in an auditory dimension, like, how do we do that in an effective way? How do we do that in an intentional way? And that's where audio branding really slots in to help guide brands to make the right decision. So, I think if you're not using audio branding, you're likely making intentional decisions, sure, when it comes to the music and the audio that you choose for these spaces. But you might be making some unintentional decisions. And audio branding really helps make sure that you're building upon something. When you're investing in audio creative, you're likely purchasing music, you're likely spending money on original music. Audio branding just helps connect the dots and start the foundational pieces to build upon something that you can make a return on. And so I think that's why now audio branding specifically has also had it's kind of been, the audio branding has been kind of searched more on Google than ever before. I think the audio branding space in terms of agencies, there are lots of new agencies now, which is great for our industry. And I think a rising tide. I would say those are kind of the reasons why audio branding is sort of making this maybe of a reemergence now is because of all the new platforms and because brands are looking for a way to kind of build upon and make the most impact on all of these new channels. And so as folks like me that have sonic sensibilities and an understanding of, consumer behavior and branding and marketing techniques, we can be helpful in the conversation to help make the right decisions. So it's a really, and on top of that all that means is that it's a really exciting time for audio and audio branding now, and I think there's been lots of great applications of audio branding in the past little while. So it's certainly a really exciting time for audio branding in general.
Thank you so much, Dexter. Cut. So, Dexter, what does the process of creating an audio brand look like? How do you collaborate with clients to capture the essence of their brand and sound?
Yeah, starting the process, it can really start from many different angles, but I think it's best to, and we always try to push to do a little bit of an exercise into exploring what a brand needs. If a brand is really interested in exploring audio branding, knowing that, they have a desire and they understand the impact of audio branding, trying not to predetermine assets and a strategy before doing a little bit of a collaborative exercise, I think is a really good place to start. That always can't be the case, and there are certainly, more than likely assets that you'll need, like an audio logo and things like that. But I think it's really helpful to start the process and doing a little bit of an audit and a little bit of landscape in terms of, where is a brand currently communicating, what are the different avenues and channels and platforms that we need to account for in determining the best sort of system to apply. And then from there, I think it starts with the fundamental and primitive exercise of just trying to create a language around how the brand sounds. I think that's the first good place to start. In order for the collaboration to be successful, communication, listening, having a shared language, having a kind of that shared thread of understanding between you, the musical expert, and your brand partner, who you're designing for, like that connection is really important. So I really like to place a lot of importance on building connection between us and the brand partner. And I think there's also a certain element of, us becoming part of their culture and, eat, sleep, breathing their brand, wearing the company hat, knowing their brand as well as they do or as well as we can. I think the best way we can do our job is to show up to the party and just be one of the team. I want to be, living those moments every day where they're thinking about how do we make an impact in our marketplace. I want to become an expert in their product category. I want to be there cheering on the sidelines like, yes, we're taking down our competition. I think the best way to make an impact with your brand is to be fully invested. And so I think for us, that process, the whole process really starts with that empathetic portion, or just like developing that empathy for your brand partner, putting yourself in the shoes of your brand. And then you do the exercise, okay, now I'm putting myself in the shoes of their customer and of their audience. And then you think like their customer, you act like their customer, you behave like their customer. And so I think the more understanding and empathy that you can have for, your brand and their audience is really the best way to start also. And then from there, there are many different, sonic and auditory exercises that we'll do in terms of, mapping attributes and doing some initial impulsive listening. And then, like the, many design thinking processes go, which is our process is built off a little bit of design thinking because that's necessary to create a scalable and impactful and modular and kind of like I would say highly useful audio branding system, is to start thinking about your audio branding process from a perspective of design thinking. And then we kind of follow through the design thinking process that makes the most sense for them. It's really never a cookie cutter process. I think audio branding has certainly evolved. And I think this is a good time to talk about how the process has evolved over the years. The audio branding process really started out as jingle writing, and there were a lot less platforms to think about. So, the creative process itself is fairly streamlined for the most part. I think the process now, I think if you're going to lead a successful audio branding strategy, you really have to be able to be flexible in your creative process. You really have to be able to start from any one point or position. All brands are different. All brands have different channels. All brands have a different audience. All brands have different product lines if they have that. So your process really needs to be super modular, very flexible, and you need to be able to start from wherever it makes the most sense to start from. You really can't be too precious with process. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that's happened with audio branding over the past little while. And I think one of the ways to help make your process more modular and flexible is to incorporate a little bit of design thinking, a little bit of UX strategy into your audio branding creative process. I think that's what we found to be very successful and helpful to our brand partners. So, there really isn't, there are steps and there's stages of thinking, in terms of, impulsive thinking and workshops and exercises and conceptual directions on themes or certain, design directions, whatever you would like to call it. And then the process of, production and refinement, and then testing, however testing shows up for you, whether it's user testing, internal testing, there are many different kinds of testing. And then ultimately, thinking about, well, and then kind of, finishing the process with, okay, well, how do we roll this out? What makes the most sense to promote this? How does the brand now that you've created this system for this brand, how can you empower your brand to govern and maintain and manage this new system? Because that's essentially what you're creating at the end of the day is a new system of brand assets. And so I think just to cap it off in terms of the audio branding process, I think it's really important for the process to stay flexible, for it to be successful, there to be a really clear line of communication. Your agency really has to be one with the brand perspective, one with the customer perspective, and you have to be an expert in their category and their competitors. And you have to build the right creative team to service and to apply musicianship towards the strategy. I think that's also a really important part of it. As I mentioned before, you could come into audio branding from a creative perspective, from film scoring or game sound design or songwriting. It's really helpful if your audio branding agency is able to call on the right creatives for the right moment at the right time for the right product category and for the right brand, So I think in terms of successful process, it's about being as empathetic as possible and being as resourceful as possible, being the best listener you can be to your brand partners, and ensuring that they're able to participate in the process in a simple way that's easy for them to make a decision, intuitive, and then ultimately when that, some form of a handoff happens and you're delivering what they've asked you to create, it's easy for them to digest and for them to use on their own. And I think when you think about the transition of audio branding, in the days of jingle writing to now, it is a very different practice entirely. It's transitioned way more than just a creative production house focusing on one asset, and has completely grown and transformed into elements of consultancy, brand strategy, audio marketing. Audio branding agencies today, I think, really have to evolve their process to deliver on the needs of their brands that really occupy those different categories of strategic thinking and creative production, and then also testing and measurement and so on and so forth. So audio branding agencies have really grown and matured over the past little while just to meet kind of the rising demand from consumers and what brands are trying to do. And so again, really exciting time for process. I think right now we're seeing the audio branding process continue to evolve and mature, and it's been really interesting. I know that our company, one of the things that we really try to focus on as much as possible in each and every project is how should the process evolve for this project. Process is never it's not a recipe, right? It's not steps to a specific goal. It's stages of thinking in order to get the best creative output possible. So we're always thinking, how is the process designed for this brand? How do we apply these stages of thinking for this specific goal? And I think that's how you can keep your process fresh, adaptable, make sure that it's properly evolving to the needs of, the marketplace and your brand partners.
Thank you so much, Dexter. So, how does the audio branding influence the emotional connection between a brand and its audience? Can you give an example of a successful emotional trigger created through sound?
Yeah, I think, audio branding, in terms of applying sound and music to a brand experience, it really is all about the emotional connection. People have such an innate and instinctual connection to sound and music as it is. You think about, everybody, whether they can think of it right now or not, but like has a favorite song. They have a song that takes them to a time and place. They have they remember the song that was playing at like prom or their graduation or, at their wedding day, or, they remember songs that, their parents showed them when they were kids. And I bring those up as examples just to kind of remind everyone that we as a humanity just have such a strong connection and universal connection to sound. And I think that's what's so powerful and so different about audio and sound and music when it comes to the branding aspect of it. That one of the great advantages is that it's universal, right? Like, within the margins here and there in terms of regional tastes and cultural aspects, everyone can listen to a song and feel emotionally changed by a piece of music. That's the capability in all of us. Just to tell a quick story, recently, my partner showed me a study that was done on newborn babies and how infants are able to recognize a consistent beat. Like newborn babies able to, when they're exposed to kind of a consistent rhythm, something changes in their response to, in terms of their brain response to a consistent rhythm. And it's so interesting. I just found that study so interesting because it's just further reveals how core our sensibilities are to music and rhythm. And I think that if we can harness that power, if brands can really wrap their heads around creating that innate connection between their brand and their customer, knowing that deep inside someone there is that deep connection to music and sound, it can be a really powerful thing, not just in terms of just trying to, create like the most effective ad or whatever, but just trying to create the best and most meaningful experiences for people. And I think that's why I got into this business to begin with, is just to use what I know as to be my talent and to make a connection with anybody on kind of their deepest sensibilities when it comes to music and sound. It's such a beautiful thing. And I think if you just start from that understanding of everybody has a deep emotional connection to music and sound, that can be harnessed in a really powerful way for brands to create great experiences for their customers. And so, building off of this innate connection that we have, that can be applied to an array of different things, whether it's the sound of somebody's voice in your advertisement or from your brand podcast, whether it's the audio logo at the end of your commercial that is, that resonates with a customer that's right for the moment, or whether it's the music that you chose as part of your brand short film or that you composed for that, whether it's when you walk into your brick and mortar location, it's the right songs for the right playlist for the right audience. That, we know that we have this innate connection, but also as of recent, there have been lots of really great studies on measuring the effectiveness on brand impact. So now we're just starting to create and connect the dots between, okay, we know as human beings we have this very deep connection to sound and music. But what does that mean for investing in, this from a brand strategy perspective? Well, there was a great study done by Ipsos that kind of measured the effectiveness of brand assets in terms of visual brand assets, copywriting, slogans, and audio logos. And it found that audio logos are up to 8 times more effective than kind of visual brand assets when used in whether it be a piece of video content or an advertisement. I thought that was just so powerful. And I think that's what we're starting to learn now as user testing capabilities are becoming more accessible to lots of brands. And we're finding that, we know that we have this innate human connection, but now we're starting to see the actual data associated with, well, what kind of investment are we, so what kind of return are we making on this investment into audio branding? Like, if we use an audio logo, can we quantify the actual impact on a customer? And you really can. And it's really helpful in terms of many different ways, not just creating, connections between all your different channels and connecting them together and having consistency and holism in terms of creating the experience. We know we can do that, but it actually empowers the messaging and the memorability of your brand, the content of what you said in that advertisement. There are just so many different metrics where we're now finding fantastic data and research around the effectiveness of audio branding. So I think it's important for brands to know that we're able to connect that kind of innate human emotional connection. Now more than ever, we're able to create that human connection to the ROI. I think that's a really important anecdote about kind of where audio branding has come. It's come so far in terms of its kind of strategic thinking. It's really come to a place of really starting to measure the ROI on audio branding. And so, I think about some really, really great examples of this. We've talked about like the kind of the theory behind it and everything, but I think great examples of this are like, for instance, and you can do the best job you can through forms of, empathetic exercises and putting yourself in the shoes of your client and their customer. I think another challenge from there is, I would say, creating that language between you and your brand partner, creating the creative momentum between you two, trying to understand how your brand partners think about sound, how the brand would like to be expressed through sound. And then I would say, in terms of challenges from a project perspective, I would say just trying to manage how much time and commitment and how much availability you have from your brand partner, and just trying to feel out, every brand is really different. As I said, your process and your project process really needs to evolve to the needs of your brand partner. Every brand partner has a different amount of time they can allocate to your project. And so you need to be able to adapt quickly to, hey, our leadership team only has a really small window of opportunity to approve something, or, being able to adapt, the fundamentals of your project process to the availability of your brand partner. I'd say that's a challenge that you need to work through with them. Every brand likes to either have really regular recurring, lots of communication points, regular meetings and that kind of thing. And then in other cases, it's a little bit touch and go with your brand partners if they have kind of more commitments, and they're managing you and probably a cabinet of other agencies, so you need to be able to respect their time and kind of their mental bandwidth. And so I would say, as a kind of form of that, another big challenge would be, trying to match the ambitions of your audio branding strategy with a simple process. I think that the simplest you can make your audio branding process achieve monumental goals, that is a sweet spot that you want to be in. As an expert in this category, it's very easy to make things very complicated. It's very easy. I mean, with any expert in any category, that you get called upon to consult for, it can be easy to overwhelm your brand partner with lots of information, So I think the best job you can do is to, how do I make this project and this journey for my partner as simple as possible? How do I make them feel comfortable? How do I make them feel empowered and properly, educated and curious about the process? And also, how do we make this fun too? How do we make the audio branding process a fun project to be a part of? So I tend to think about all of those things as challenges, but I would say, and maybe those are universal challenges for any kind of design company. I would say, though, the challenge that I'm focused on most today is the aspect of adoption and governance for an audio branding, so an audio identity that we would create for a brand, making sure that, yes, sort of after the process is done of, hey, we've created something that we love that's going to be effective. We know this is going to work in all of our channels. This is fantastic. We have our library of assets, whatever that may be. The process of adoption and governance on the brand side, that's kind of the hard part. It's a little bit like sending your kid off to school. It's like we've created this baby together, and now, you have to be a little bit involved in managing and making sure that, they're empowered to utilize this system, right? You've given them audio tools to use, and just making sure that handoff moment is easy for the brand. They feel well equipped to use their new tools and their new library and their assets on their own in the most effective way possible. I think I've seen many projects, or just I've seen, logos come out or audio branding projects come out in the industry. And I've been a part of projects before at previous agencies where, you see a grand opening of someone's new audio identity, but then it maybe falls to the wayside over time. And for whatever reason, whether it is, maybe it's lack of effectiveness, or maybe it's lack of governance, but I think now that audio branding and audio identity creation has really scaled out to a system of assets, whether that's, an audio logo system that takes on different forms of shortness and length, and maybe multiple versions of kind of an original brand music library, product sounds, a vocal identity library of on-brand vocal talent. The audio branding system can really get pretty large, right? And it can be lots to manage, but I think, the biggest challenge is making sure that, we get our brand partners kind of well empowered to use their system in a way that's effective for them, and then circulate that around the company, bring on the right folks, and make sure everybody is educated. And so I think that's one of the trickier things to work through at the back end. Your creative process is probably likely a small group of people, or sometimes it can be a small group of people, big creative decision makers. But then once you get to the end of this creative project, lots of people have to use it, not even just internally, different agencies, different agency partners, content creators. So kind of building the system to live alongside the brand's visual brand identity and whatever the system they have there. I think that's a big challenge that I think is in the blind spot for a lot of projects and for a lot of people. And I think it's one thing that we've really emphasized trying to improve and evolve, and to be as fluent as possible, and making sure our brand partners are properly set up so that they can use their assets and govern the system themselves internally with their partners kind of going forward.
Thank you so much, Dexter. So Dexter, how do you measure the success or impact of an audio branding strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question, because there are many different forms of success, and I think it's really important to define what success looks like as early as you can in part of the beginning stages of the project. And those can be, I think you have really brand specific, success goals, like, hey, we'd like the audio branding to, be easily deployable in these really main channels that we have that we're really focused on. I mean, those are, indicators of success if you can effectively deliver on what the brand is really looking for, which maybe are more universal forms of success. But, I think maybe tried and true forms of success when it comes to audio branding are, how memorable is the audio identity that we've made? How memorable is that? And there are tests and studies that you can do to measure how successful the memorability of what you made is. I would say also client success is a really important one for me. I think if the process and the project that was performed, I think I think for client success, I think if the process was easy and that your client partner was kind of educated along the way, if they felt engaged, I think all of those are really good forms of success as well. And I would say, and there are measurable forms of success, right? Like you can get the opinions and thoughts and feelings of your audience and expose them to what you've made and say, hey, do you like this or do you not like this? How does this make you feel? And if that if that is reaching the kind of metrics that you've put in place in terms of the forms of success for the project, then that can be a form of success, right? But I think maybe some of the forms of success that are kind of lesser known, I would say, not just in terms of the effectiveness or the success of the creative output itself. But I think it's really important to place some success factors on the longevity and the kind of the rollout of the audio identity. I think it's important to place success metrics on, how easy is it for your brand's team to use and deploy the audio logo or the audio identity themselves. So I think there's an array of different success measurements, but I would say it ranges from client success to marketing success to creative success and to strategic success. And as I said, from the top, I think it's just about identifying what those are to begin with. But I think one of my favorite parts of measuring success along the way is that user testing aspect in terms of, how successful are we in terms of the impact that we're making on customers. I think it's so interesting when you perform a study, at least a sound specific study with a group of people, and just seeing how folks kind of respond to audio stimuli and hearing how they express how they're feeling in response to maybe it's an audio logo or a piece of music. That part is at least one of my favorite and most insightful parts about the entire journey, because so much of the process and the strategy is sort of theoretical, right? We're making a lot of assumptions, and we're posing a hypothesis about what kind of sonic creation are we going to make, and we hope that this will make an impact. But when you actually get to the moment of now you've made something that you believe in and it's time to test it with your audience, that kind of moment, that anticipation moment of, hey, we've tried to deliver creatively in all these forms of success. Now we need to really validate that with our user base. That moment when you're asking folks what do they think of what you made is such a really insightful moment for me. The way people describe how they're feeling, sometimes they'll say, "Oh, this reminds me of this sound that came from this or that, or something in their past," or like, "Oh, this sounds like a song that I heard," or something like that, or like, or someone will say like, "Oh, this reminds me of just the associations that people make when they're exposed to something like that." I think it's really insightful, and whether positive or negative, that's sort of the whole point of the user testing process. But yeah, I think that part when you're searching for success or validation in success, that user testing aspect, I think is just such an interesting part to me as a part of that journey along the way.
Thank you so much, Dexter. So, where do you see the future of audio brand heading with the rise of AI? And are there any emerging trends that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I get excited about creative AI in how it's developing with sound and music. It's really come a long way. It's definitely a little bit further behind than visual AI in terms of like generative creative output and that kind of thing. But there are some convincing platforms, and music AI is really complicated right now. It's not too complicated, but there's just many different forms of generative music, whether that's, from an audio perspective, like Google LM, or from kind of a MIDI data perspective, like some other platforms. There are many different ways to like activate generative music and generative AI, and it's getting there. It's definitely not to the uncanny valley destination where I think now we're getting with visual AI. Now we have like we have AI influencers and stuff, like creating Instagram accounts, and they're even promoting products and stuff like that, and it's really hard for people to tell the difference between human and AI influencer at this point now, which is a really interesting place that we've gotten to. But when it comes to music, we're still a little bit further behind. So I think we have sort of the luxury of seeing how image and video generative AI is sort of taking off and how it's being applied. And I think, for folks like me, folks that are kind of at the forefront of the industry and where this will likely be applied, it's important for us to really observe what's going on and then to understand, okay, how do we apply this in an effective way to our industry? So I think we're getting the luxury of seeing that in a different medium. But I get excited about it from, I think there's lots of kind of terror around, oh, this is going to replace creatives' jobs and everything like that. And, everything is at risk because you'll be able to press a button and generate an audio logo and things like that. But I think we're like really, really, really far away from that. Maybe there will be a day where that comes, but I think more likely in the short term, when we get to a convincing place with AI music, I think it'll just help generate, audio assets for brands at scale. It'll be a really cost-effective tool for brands. I don't think, the role of the strategist and the audio creative is going to be erased. I think it's just important that as audio strategists and creatives, we adopt this as a tool to help our brand partners scale their audio desires and their goals through AI, right? And so I get excited about being able to play with that in terms of creating, more assets for brands at a cost-effective rate, and then also using AI to generate new creative ideas that you wouldn't necessarily have created before. I tend to think about it as an interesting superpower, sort of a turbocharge to the process, and a way to generate new creative ideas. So I think it'll likely take that form of just plugging in and empowering the process and empowering what we're already doing. And I think I'm just a little less stressed, maybe not rightfully so, but I think I'm just a little less stressed about it completely erasing everybody's jobs or something like that. But I think just to kind of mitigate that, even from a creative perspective, as a creative in this industry, I think embracing it is the best thing you can do, and just figuring out how to use it as a creative tool for yourselves and an effective tool for your partners. So I'm curious to see how it continues to evolve. We're certainly playing around and experimenting with these things and seeing how it can be used. But I'm definitely not on the side of, hey, we need to slow it down, shut it down, but I tend to be more of an optimist, I guess. So it's exciting. It's an exciting place to be.
Thank you so much, Dexter. So, what advice would you give to brands just starting to explore audio branding, and what resources would you recommend to our listeners who want to learn more about audio branding?
Yeah, I would say in terms of just starting out, I think for a brand that's just looking to dip their toe into the conversation, is just to start by talking to somebody. I would say start by just having a conversation with, somebody like myself, or just, an expert in the industry, and just having an intro conversation about like, hey, I understand this is an effective thing for other brands, but I'm not sure if this is right for me. Have an open conversation about it. And then also I would say, look at your competitors, see what your competitors are doing, look at your brands that you admire most, see how they are using audio. Most brands are using audio and music and sound in some intentional form. And I think that's why it's going back to the top of our discussion today in terms of, well, really, what is audio branding? If you broaden your definition and simplify it to any intentional use of sound and music, it really opens up the gate and creates more access for all brands of any size to utilize and access audio branding. If you're a small brand just starting up, obviously you don't have the big budgets to invest in some grand system, but you can start by making intentional decisions early on just to help empower what you're doing now as your brand is just starting out, and to make sure that there's no wasted effort, really. And so that can start at the most micro form with the smallest brand of, 2 people in a seed startup and what have you. And but that can also scale out to, major corporations that have had, a heritage brand for the last 150 years or something like that are saying, hey, we've never really tried audio branding. What does that look like for such a monumental and global international company like this? There's a way to get involved and to start making intentional decisions with sound and music for brands at any size. So I think, yeah, that's where it starts, is like looking at your competitors, seeing your landscape, looking at the brands that you admire most, and then just having an open conversation with an expert in the industry and getting some perspective on it. I would guarantee you that whether you're a small or large brand, you most likely have made a decision on sound in association with your brand, whether it's the sound of the voice that's narrating some commercial, whether that's the sound being used of the commercial itself, the music that goes along with the commercial. Whether it's your brand podcast and you need an intro music, you need outro music, there is some decision around sound being made. And if it's not intentional, then unfortunately it may go to waste. So there are sound decisions being made. It's just about really maximizing them and connecting the dots. And that's how folks like myself can be helpful to people in the industry. Any company, small or big, there's a way to get involved.
Thank you so much, Dexter, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So could you please share with us, how does your day look like? Any interesting stories?
Oh man, how does my day look like? I don't know. We're off on break, so I'm trying to do the most uninteresting thing and pretty much relax and just listen to music, try to recharge, take stock, take care of my mind and my body, trying to recharge, get ready for a new year. But I think the most interesting thing that happened to me was last week. I was on a trip to Spain. I was on a trip to Barcelona, working with an automotive client, and because this is more interesting than me just sitting on the couch listening to some records, we were working with an automotive partner where we had created the external engine sound of an electric vehicle for them. And so I don't know if if this is sort of a new thing in as the rise of electric vehicles kind of comes about here and in the US and internationally. One of the most interesting things that's happening with the rise of EVs is this new sound regulation that is a part of any new EV that's brought into the market. So any new EV now that is entering the marketplace has to emit an external sound, basically as a replacement for the traditional internal combustion engine sound. Now, this external sound, though, has a ton of really strict and detailed requirements about how loud it can be, what kind of frequencies it should be emitting, how long and at what speeds, and all these different kind of auditory and sonic regulations around it. It's a tricky thing to design, but it's something that we've become kind of experts in over the past couple of years. But we were preparing this vehicle to get certified for their external electric vehicle sound, and we were working in one of my favorite places and favorite facilities to work in, which is called a hemianechoic chamber. So if you're familiar with an anechoic chamber, you probably are, Tej, from being associated with Microsoft, because they have one of the quietest anechoic chambers in the world. But an anechoic chamber, for the listeners out there, an anechoic chamber is a specially designed room that is the quote unquote quietest, some of the quietest places on Earth, which means there are zero reflections of sound happening in that room. So basically, typically if you're in like a bedroom or a living room or something, sound is bouncing off the walls at all different locations and places and in different directions, and it's kind of creating sort of an ambiance or kind of sonic ambiance to the room. It's contributing to the loudness of the room. It contributes to the sound of your voice and all these things. But in an anechoic chamber, which is completely designed to eliminate any sonic reflections, it is technically some of the quietest places on Earth. So it's in a hemianechoic chamber just means that it's a place where we bring in an automotive vehicle, and these are big room, right? So it's a very big room, probably about the size of a basketball court. It's a really interesting design. If you Google it, if you just look up hemianechoic chamber, the design of these places is so interesting. It's just it looks like all these different spikes coming out from the ceiling and from the walls and everything, and it's such a cool place to work because it's one of the quietest locations in the world. And so that was a pretty eventful week, working with a new EV, working on this new kind of sound, trying to navigate this challenge and help our client meet this regulation, working in one of the coolest facilities, or like acoustic facilities, I would say, I love to work in. And also I was in Barcelona for a little bit, so I, had a good time abroad. So that was probably the most interesting week, probably of the year. um, but that's a lot more interesting than how I'm gonna spend this weekend in New Year's, which is just probably just relaxing.
Thank you so much, Dexter, for sharing such a wonderful event with us. So we'll conclude the show by your three favorite book recommendations and also people who inspire you the most in this space.
Yeah. You know what? Since have a music themed podcast today, I'll recommend three albums that I've been listening to, and hopefully your listeners will appreciate that. So so I've been listening to, actually, on the way here, I had him in headphones, and when I was in Barcelona, I was just playing this nonstop. I've been listening to "The Life of Pierre 5" by Pierre Bourne. He's like an R&B and hip hop producer that makes music for kind of more famous rap groups and hip hop artists, but he has like an individual album that I think is so good, and yeah, really, really, really simple. It's really simple, and I really like his choice of keyboard sounds or synthesizer sounds. It's really like sparkly stuff. It's like the whole thing just has this like sheen and sparkle to it. But then there's like a simplicity in the whole thing, and simplicity in melody and simplicity in harmony. And it's just like such a meditative album. So I've been listening to that like nonstop. I'm sure it'll show up on my 2024 Wrapped or something like that. The other one that I just discovered like really recently, and maybe I'm behind on this, but I've been listening to Space 1.8 by Nala Senefro. Such a cool like experimental jazz and ambient album. Like, has all of my favorite little bits of sound kind of in one album, from just like real ambient meditative stuff with synths to these like really colorful phrases with saxophone and just like explosive drums, and just, yeah, it's like it's a super emotional journey, but also in this like, yeah, really zen-like state from start to finish. So highly recommend Space 1.8 by Nala Sinifro. And then this, I'd say, like, another big record for me, probably, oh, I forget what the album is called. It's Life Without Buildings. The third album I've been listening to a lot is Any Other City by Life Without Buildings. Yeah, really, really cool rock group from like indie rock group, I think from Scotland or something like that. Kind of around like the early 2000s. Yeah, there's just, I mean, the vocals I think are the most interesting part about this record, and it's by this woman who's a visual artist that I guess like decided to make one music record as like a part of her like artistic journey. And so there's only one record by this band, and so I wish they would have made more records, but there's a cool like repetitiveness to the vocals, and then it's like really dry guitar, and everything just feels so close and like intimate and like really imperfect, and like real emotional guitar stuff, but then like really poetic repetitive vocals, and just these drum phrases that are just just really simple. And I don't know, maybe there's a theme that I'm going with here, like simplicity is key or something like that, and that's like what I've been listening to. But yeah, that's kind of been in heavy rotation for me over the last little bit. I would just say the first thing that comes to mind are just, when I think about this year and I think about, the people that inspire me, I just think about all the composers that we work with. We've got just like an incredible team, and I learn so much from my team. Like every time we collaborate together, just new techniques and ways of thinking. And I would say just my team every day, I think, because I work with them so much, and we're constantly talking about audio branding together. We're constantly talking about sound. And I think, yeah, without saying like, like Gandhi or something like that, like just the people that I work with every day, our creative team, we're really blessed to have such a great group of people. So just getting to work with my team and just getting inspired by the folks that you work with every day, I think this year has been really inspiring for me.
Thank you so much, Dexter, for sharing all these wonderful recommendations with us. We are looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes.
Awesome. Thank you, Tej. This has been really great. And I just appreciate you so much having me on. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I look forward to keep on listening to you and your guests.
Thank you so much.